And what that experience taught me, I didn't know it at the time, but what it taught me was what it's like to have an illness that bears zero stigma, because nobody judges a little boy with a bad heart. And nobody says to that little boy, oh, do you really need the surgery? Or, those kinds of stigmatized ways of thinking, they just don't happen.
Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tencer, curator of Say Hi to the Future, helping leaders think differently in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity. Better thinking, better outcomes. With me today is Jason Finucan, founder at StigmaZero, a company that helps other companies build psychologically safe workplaces for all of their employees. Jason, welcome back to Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Jason, one of the things that I always tell people is, talk to people, meet people. And we actually met on a plane. We met on a plane. I think our wives met on the plane first and introduced us. And we just started chatting, got to know one another, and had a wonderful chat about, you and your past on the last podcast. So bring us up to speed a little bit on that.
Yeah, I remember our meeting fondly because it was one of those examples of just natural connection happening. It was, like you say, started with our wives. And then I remember we were in the customs line, and that's where we had the nice long chat because it was a long, slow customs line. But yeah, I've continued since our my last visit to your podcast. I've continued with my focus on helping companies to end the stigma of mental illness so that they can basically be more supportive of the people that work with them, work for them, and who are facing mental health challenges. And I also am working very hard to establish my speaking brand, which is called the Mental Health Caddy. And that's me delivering keynotes on the topics of mental health, mental illness, stigma, and suicide prevention.
And so this really is the mission, the whole notion of reducing stigma around mental illness. It's central to your work. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe about yourself and how this all triggered for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a unique experience with illness in that I've had a major physical illness. I had a nerve defect in my heart when I was a young boy. And that resulted, to fix it, we needed open heart surgery when I was 12 years old. And what that experience taught me, I didn't know it at the time, but what it taught me was what it's like to have an illness that bears zero stigma, because nobody judges a little boy with a bad heart. And nobody says to that little boy, oh, do you really need the surgery? Or, those kinds of stigmatized ways of thinking, they just don't happen. And then many years later in my 20s, I was experiencing the symptoms of what would later be diagnosed as bipolar disorder. And the symptoms involved very severe clinical depression and hypomania as well. And when I first had the symptoms, I had enormous stigma towards mental illness. I just was one of those people who thought, I'm strong, this can't happen to me. So I lived through denial and just tried to soldier on through the illness, which of course didn't work at all. The illness got worse and worse. And then my epiphany that got me into this space and had me improve my own response to my own illness was I asked myself the question, what would I have done if my heart defect had come back in my 20s? And what would my experience have been like? And the answer is it would have been completely different. I would have felt no shame or stigma. I would have been comfortable sharing it with my friends and my colleagues. I would have immediately sought medical attention and done what the doctors told me to do. But because it was a mental illness, I denied it. I hid it. I didn't talk with anybody about it. I didn't seek medical treatment or medical advice. I did everything wrong. And the only difference is that there was stigma about mental illness and there isn't about physical illness. And that's when I realized our society has a problem with the way we are responding to mental illness. And my experiences combined with my ability, I've got strong platform skills because I have a degree in theater and speech communication. All of that combined I knew that I had a message that I could use to help others overcome stigma the way that I did.
Yeah, it seems to me, I mean, one, thanks for your openness, and two, kudos on your resilience. I mean, you know, from being a young child with what you went through. But it still seems to me, Jason, that there's still a lot more stigma around mental illness rather than physical. And is it maybe because it's harder to understand or grasp? Like, I guess open heart surgery or a blockage. I mean, it's something that we can not see, but you can see on a picture, if you will, on an X-ray. And you sort of have the tools or know how to fix it because it's such a physical issue. When it comes to mental, do you think that's part of the stigma is you can't see it, you can't understand it, and there's just so many permutations, I guess?
I think that is part of it for sure. And the other part of it is because mental illnesses affect your mood, they affect how you feel and how you think and how you act. People make the mistake of thinking that it's actually your character that is flawed rather than your brain, which is not working properly. And that's one of the core messages that I give is that mental illness is a brain illness. It's not a character flaw. It's not a matter of this person's not strong or not willing to try hard enough. If your brain is out of balance chemically, that's something that you cannot control in the same way as if you had cancer. You can't just wish the cancer away. It's there and you have to deal with it. But with cancer, you know, there is no stigma. You respond to it with a lot of clarity and with, understanding that you need to follow doctor's advice and that you likely need a treatment. The stigma, even the name mental illness is a bit of a problem because mental connotes mind, which makes you think about personality rather than thinking about it being a brain illness, which is, of course, a physical illness.
So where do you think we are?
Well, I would say this. We're way further ahead than we were 10 years ago. When I started doing this work, and actually even more than 10 years ago, I started volunteering and being a mental health advocate in that way, sharing my story and trying to educate people. When I started, very little awareness existed about mental health. There is definitely a higher degree of awareness, which is fantastic. And there is a lessening of the stigma, but it is still there. And the reason it's there is because it's been part of our society for 100 years. There's been, and if you think of all of mental illness in movies and television, it's often misrepresented and actually feeds the stigma. And so it's a bit like turning the Titanic. It's a slow moving improvement, but it is improving, and that's been encouraging to see.
And are there processes about changing stigmas that you've looked at, heard about, not just for mental illness, but just in general, because there are so many stigmas that exist? Are there any roadmaps to turning the Titanic?
Yeah, the truth is overcoming stigma is actually quite simple. It may be difficult to do, but doing it is actually very, very simple. And it's simply learning more about that which has the stigma. So whether that's a mental illness or whether that's anything else, if you simply learn about that condition and understand it for what it is, the stigma starts to fade. The stigma only really can thrive when something is kept at arm's length and you don't fully understand it. And that's where it gets to being scary or something that you might be afraid to talk about. And so knowledge is the first and foremost important thing to overcome stigma. And the second thing is empathy. If you have empathy for your fellow humans and you find out that somebody in your life is struggling, instead of judging them, you would first feel empathy for them, for the difficulty of their situation, and you'd want to help them. And so if you help a person who has a mental health challenge or a mental illness, even if you might have had stigma originally, you'll open up conversations with that person, and those conversations will help shine a light on the stigma. And I like to use the analogy, stigma is like a mold. It can only grow in the dark. If you shine a bright light on it, it absolutely will fade. And so that's, I believe, the number one way that stigma can be overcome.
Well, I love that. I love, it's like a mold that can only grow in the dark. I will remember that one, Jason.
Good.
The other thing, though, that you mentioned is empathy. And I find in my work, that is just one of the most misunderstood terms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get into a room and you're doing some brainstorming or ideation, and everybody goes, you know, no question is a bad question. We're here to listen to everybody and everyone's opinion. And they believe that that is being empathetic. But it's not. It's being inclusive, at least in taking questions. Empathy is really putting yourself into the question asker's shoes, if you will.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I just don't think we understand that.
Yeah, empathy is definitely something that needs more focus because it solves a lot of problems. It really does. If you have deep empathy, you are almost automatically going to get to know a person's experience better because you can't imagine being in their shoes if you don't understand what they're going through. So if you have empathy, you want to know what they're going through. You want to start those conversations. And empathy is the opposite of conflict. Empathy allows for understanding between people. And that when somebody approaches another person with that in their mind, it automatically leads to a deeper understanding. But you're right. A lot of people do misunderstand what empathy is. And the other factor to this is emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
That's a key skill that when somebody has high EQ, they are less likely to fall prey to things like stigma because they're able to, and frankly, that's how I overcame it as well. It took those skills for me to beat it. And when I talk about beating stigma, like the title of my book is Jason 1 StigmaZero. It's not Jason 1 Bipolar Zero. I have not conquered my illness. I manage my illness and I manage it quite well as I can. But what I did do was absolutely conquer the stigma. And there's another phrase that I use, which is that mental illness can be treated, but stigma can be cured. We can cure ourselves of the stigma once and for all. And once that's done, the response to mental health challenges and mental illnesses dramatically improves.
So when did you decide that this wasn't just going to be about you on a personal level, working through these challenges or defeating, the stigma in and around you? Like, when did you decide this was going to be a platform or a cause for you to take up?
That was quite a long time ago. That was in 2006 was when I began my work as a mental health advocate. And then it was many years later in 2015 when I actually decided that I was going to found a company around this and start helping other companies, to do this. But when I first started, it was, as I said, near the beginning of the podcast, it first was when I overcame stigma in my own head, in my own heart, and then looked back at the previous 3 years and saw all the mistakes that I had made that were rooted in that stigma. And so I felt this internal motivation to just say, okay, I've just learned something very important and it's made my experience better, but it took me 3 years to learn it. If I share my story, I might give people the opportunity to learn it much faster. And I don't know, it's why I had that instinct to help others. I mean, that's a philanthropic nature that I have. And I just knew that my experience would resonate with others and would help them to overcome the stigma that they may have in their mind.
This must have been really hard for you at the time and taken a lot of courage. Because you are opening up yourself. If there is a stigma, you're exposing yourself to potential employers or partners that I'm battling something.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Although it didn't feel like that at the time, it didn't feel courageous. It felt necessary. And sometimes when you think in those terms, the courage just comes with it. You say to yourself, well, this has to happen and I have the ability to do it. And once I made the decision to do it, it strangely wasn't that hard. It was more during those years that I was prey to the stigma. That was hard. When I wasn't managing my illness properly, that was hard. But once I was managing it in a proactive way, and I knew that my story would help others, it really was a sort of black and white decision. I decided to do it, and having decided to do it, I didn't feel any fear, any stigma, any concern for how this might come back on me, because I knew I was on the right side of this topic. I knew that ending the stigma was what had to happen and what would benefit others. And so, I knew that it would be accepted in that way.
So what inspired you to write a book now? Tell us about it.
Yeah, the book, I'll be honest, I've always wanted to write a book. I probably would have expected that if I did write a book, it would be a fiction. I had several ideas for that, but it really was the response I was getting to my keynotes. I'll give you an example. If I did a keynote, even early on in my volunteer days, if there was 200 people in the room and I spoke for an hour, and then I had a 20-minute Q&A period, after that, when everything was over, there would still be a lineup of 10 to 12 people who wanted to speak to me personally. And they would say things like, I believe that I'm struggling with depression, but I never knew it until I heard you describe it. Or people saying, I know that I have a mental illness, but I've been making the mistake that you did. I've been letting stigma prevent me from managing it properly, and now I'm going to change that. And so the reaction I was getting was very positive and very real. And it just struck me that if I wrote a book, I would be able to reach more people with this message. And so the book became a natural extension of my advocacy, and it made sense for StigmaZero, my company. It made sense because I'm the key instructor in StigmaZero's online programs, and I'm the face of StigmaZero. And so having a book out there is always a good thing as well.
And so, sorry, tell us the name of the book again.
Yeah, it's Jason 1 StigmaZero, like a score, and my battle with mental illness at home and in the workplace.
And how will this help others who are battling or know somebody who might be battling with mental illness? This book goes through my entire life and mines it for the lessons that I learned along the way. It explains how stigma existed and how it impacted me, why I fell prey to it. And it also shares all of the ways that I manage my illness and all of the ways that I thought that led to me ending the stigma. And so it's basically part memoir and part how-to. It's like a guide to what you should do if you're facing mental health challenges inside of you, or if you are a caregiver to somebody who is experiencing this. It will help in both ways. What are some of the tips that you provide to people?
The simplest and the first one is always talk to people. So if you're a caregiver and you know someone in your life is experiencing difficulty with their mental health, reach out to them. Ask them if you can be of help to them. Often just starting the conversation with something as simple as, I know that you've been struggling with your mental health. I'd love to help you. Is there anything I can do? I just know that I'm in your corner and I'm here to support you. That beginning of a conversation can really be an important first step. So talking about it, if you're somebody who has a mental health challenge or a diagnosed mental illness, to stop letting stigma keep you from reaching out for help. That is one of the key things is if you are managing an illness like this, you can't do it alone. It's difficult, and no one should manage a major illness without any support. And nobody does manage a major physical illness without any support. There's always family and friends and doctors that are there to support you. And so if you have a mental health challenge or a mental illness, seek support in your networks, in your friends, in your family, and seek medical attention, because then you have doctors who are guiding you as well.
That's a very simple but sage first step. It must be hard. I was going to say, is it hard? It must be hard to open up even to your best friend and say, I have this challenge.
And the truth is, it is hard because of the stigma, but it shouldn't be hard. And one of the ways that I ask people to think is simply to say, what would you do if you learned tomorrow that you were facing, for a man, prostate cancer, and for a woman, breast cancer? If you were given a diagnosis of that, would you feel fear or shame, or would it be difficult to tell your friends that, or to reach out for help for that? And the answer is not really. Wouldn't be that difficult at all, because you wouldn't feel shame. There's no shame in having breast cancer. It's bad luck. It's unfortunate. There's no shame in having prostate cancer. It's bad luck and it's unfortunate, but you know how to deal with it, because as a society, we don't have stigma towards it. And so, yes, opening up initially is going to be a little difficult, but if you just ask yourself, how would I be behaving? How would I be reacting if this was prostate cancer or breast cancer? And then guiding yourself with the answer and just simply doing the same thing you would have done. And what's really quite amazing is that when a person that is facing this opens up, how quickly the response is incredibly positive. Because by opening up, you're actually giving the people in your life who care about you, you're giving them a roadmap in how to help you. And that's what they want. They absolutely want to help you. They just need guidance.
I also sense that when you open up about it, you start to discover that, and I'm not talking specifically to bipolar because I don't know the percentages, but anxiety, depression, I don't think this is as scarce as people might believe. And I think when you open up, you start hearing stories back about people around you and you go, oh, I'm actually not alone here.
Not alone at all. It is the opposite of scarce. 1 in 4 people will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. Far more than that will experience a mental health challenge. And just to clarify those two terms and why I use them is that a mental health challenge is when you are in a situation that is detrimental to your mental health. That could be a failing relationship. That could be a job in a toxic work environment. There could be lots of reasons. You could be struggling with alcohol. There are lots of reasons why you may have a challenge to your mental health. It's something that is hurting your mental health, but you have not been diagnosed with a mental illness. And then there are those who are diagnosed with a clinical mental illness, whether that's depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, any of those. If you have a mental health challenge, normally the best thing you can do is identify where that's coming from and try to solve that problem. But if it's a mental illness, that's when you need medical attention. That's when you need a doctor to be part of your support team, because often there will be a medical treatment that can radically improve your situation. And when it comes to medical treatments, people saying, oh, I don't want to take a medication to treat my mental illness. I always ask, if you were a type 1 diabetic, would you be resisting the insulin? Would you be saying, I don't want to take the insulin? Or would you look at the insulin as exactly what you need to overcome that illness? And that's how people would view it. You certainly would never say to a person who's type 1 diabetic, hey, why are you continuing to use that insulin? You look like you're doing really well. Why don't you stop it? Nobody would say that. But that happens with treatments to mental illness. It's just so important to get to a place where all illness is treated the same. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to help people to do.
And what can other people do? I mean, we're having this conversation. It's great. I am learning. I'm sure the listeners are learning. But if we want to do something to fight against stigma, what's one practical thing we can do, or where do we start to help people in our own lives?
Yeah, the very first thing to do is to ask yourself, do you know anyone who you think or know that they are dealing with mental health challenge or a mental illness? And if you do, and you feel comfortable with this, to reach out and basically let them know you're there to help them, and let them know that you're there to talk if they ever want to. The stigma goes away when frank, open conversations happen. As soon as a person starts talking about their experience and the other person enters the conversation with empathy and emotional intelligence, the stigma just falls away. Now it becomes just a normal conversation between two people, one of whom is facing a health challenge. It stops being a mental health challenge and simply becomes what it is, which is a health challenge. And any health challenge is something that we need to support each other through. And so that's really the foundation of it.
So I understand that between friends, I'd say, but as an employer, and I know that employment or HR law is different from province, from state, from country, but as an employer where I live and work, I would be scared to death of bringing anything up about mental illness or challenge to an employee. It goes past stigma. I mean, if it's not something, any disease state, if it's not something an employee wants to bring up to you, you really can't address it.
Yes, and that is a very real challenge, and that's the fundamental purpose of my company, StigmaZero, is to deploy a training program inside of companies that basically helps them to normalize conversations about mental health. It takes it from something you'd be afraid to do to something that you feel comfortable doing because you know that your colleagues and your managers have taken the same training. And that training talks about, we will never overcome the stigma in the workplace unless we can normalize talking about it. And that doesn't mean every person who has a mental illness must disclose to their employer. That there is privacy that is allowed and is certainly a person's right. But one example is say a manager who has a team of people and one of them is struggling with their performance and it's obvious that they're not well. The thing that the manager doesn't know is what is the reason behind this. But what the manager can say is, I've noticed you've not been yourself lately. Is there anything that I can do to help you? Do you know about our employee assistance program? So we, for example, teach managers how to have those difficult conversations. And we also talk about how colleagues can say the same thing. It's completely acceptable for two colleagues who know each other fairly well for one to say to the other, you just don't seem quite like yourself lately. Is there something wrong? Is there anything that I can be of help with? And it's very common that the answer to that will be quite honest. The truth is I am struggling. And then the reason comes out, whether that's my marriage is falling apart, or that's I'm having financial difficulties, or that is I have been feeling terrible and I believe that I'm struggling with clinical depression. These conversations start to happen when they are initiated, even in the workplace, but it is more complex. And that's why I built the training program that I did build with StigmaZero, because unless you take stigma and in the workplace and really define it and really understand where it comes from, only then can you eradicate it. And that's why the training is so vital.
Yeah, and I would just, reinforce that too. It's not something that for me, as a longtime entrepreneur and employer, it's not something I would ever have undertaken or would undertake or tell my team to unless they've been trained.
Exactly.
Because, it's complex, not just in the illness, but in not getting sued. And I don't want to be that blunt about it, but you really just don't want to infringe on anybody's rights. So I'm all with you that properly trained situations can open the door. And I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of training and making those conversations more possible, if you will.
Thank you.
So, Jason, what's next for you in terms of your mission to break down stigma? Anything new, or you're just? I guess you want to get out on the road a bit more for the book.
That's exactly it. So I'm continuing to do my work with StigmaZero in helping companies, and that will always stay the same. That's my mission there is to help employers end the stigma of mental illness, and my vision for StigmaZero is a future without stigma, which is somewhat ironic because if we ever achieve our vision, then StigmaZero will be out of business because it won't be needed anymore. But the truth is, I would love to see that happen in my lifetime. I would love it if stigma around mental illness just simply became obsolete. It just doesn't happen anymore. But what I'm focusing on in addition to that is becoming more active as a keynote speaker. And so I've developed the website, jasonfinucan.com. And I've developed a brand for my speaking, which is Mental Health Caddy. And the reason I chose that is in golf, as an analogy, everyone understands that a caddy is there to support the player, not just by carrying the bag, but by offering key guidance and advice. And so that's really what I want to be for people. So when I deliver a keynote, everyone in the audience will walk away with far more knowledge about what mental illness is, what is mental health, what is stigma, how can I eradicate stigma, what are the things I should say when talking about mental illness, and very importantly, what are the things I shouldn't say when talking about mental illness. And so I want to be your mental health caddy. I want to help you through this difficult process, and the vehicle that I do that with is through keynote speeches.
Jason Finucan, founder of StigmaZero, company that helps other companies build psychologically safe workplaces for their employees. You're the author of Jason 1 StigmaZero and a mental health caddy. Thank you so much for joining us on Say Hi to the Future today.
Thank you, Ken. It's always a pleasure to see you and to be part of this excellent podcast.
And we will be in touch and have you back, I'm sure, as you progress through this. Take care, Jason. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support our show, leave us a review and join our mailing list by visiting www.spider.works. That's SPYDER.works, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for listening, and see you all next Friday.